One exhausted father held his sleeping 8-year-old daughter close as passengers settled into the luxury cabin, believing the hardest part of their journey was finally over. Within moments, a wealthy stranger would point at him and insist he had no right to be there. Before anyone checked the facts, whispers spread through the cabin. Phones began recording, and every pair of eyes turned toward the quiet man who refused to raise his voice. No one imagined that 5 minutes later the captain would make an announcement that would change several lives forever. His name was Ethan Carter, although very few people on that flight knew anything about the sacrifices that had brought him to that seat. His daughter Lily had dreamed of flying first class ever since watching airplanes climb into the sky from a nearby park. For months, Ethan skipped small comforts, worked overtime, and redeemed every travel reward he could earn just to give Lily one unforgettable memory. He believed the trip would remind her that hope could still exist after loss. Instead, it became the day the entire cabin witnessed how quickly appearances can deceive. Before we go any deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Just a few rows away sat Victoria Langford, a powerful executive accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. The moment she noticed Ethan in the seat she believed should belong to her, she smiled with complete confidence. What happened next would test every member of the crew and reveal that the most important witness on board was someone nobody noticed. The truth was that nobody looking at Ethan Carter that morning could have guessed how much it had taken just to reach that airplane. To the strangers around him, he looked like an ordinary father wearing a neatly pressed shirt that had seen better days, a pair of polished shoes that had been repaired more than once, and a tired smile that seemed determined to reassure his daughter that everything was going exactly as planned. What they could not see were the years of quiet sacrifices that had shaped the man sitting in seat 2A. They could not see the extra shifts he accepted after everyone else had gone home, the birthdays he spent working late, because overtime meant another step closer to fulfilling a promise, or the countless evenings he sat at his kitchen table calculating bills with a pencil, because every single dollar had a purpose. Ethan had learned that life rarely rewarded people simply for working hard, but he also believed that giving up was never an option when someone else depended on you. That belief became the foundation of every decision he made after the day his world changed forever. 3 years earlier, Ethan's wife, Sarah, had lost a long battle with an illness that arrived quietly and refused to leave. The months leading to her passing were filled with hospital visits, whispered conversations outside treatment rooms, and hopeful smiles that hid fears neither of them wanted to admit. When she was gone, Ethan found himself standing in a silent house with an 8-year-old girl asking questions that no parent ever wants to answer. Lily did not understand why her mother could not come home, and Ethan struggled to explain something he barely understood himself. Instead of allowing grief to consume their lives, he made a promise while holding his daughter's hand at the cemetery. He told her that even though their family looked different now, they would continue creating happy memories together because that was exactly what Sarah would have wanted. It sounded simple when he said it aloud, but keeping that promise became the hardest challenge he had ever faced. Every morning began before sunrise. Ethan prepared breakfast, packed Lily's school lunch, helped her with homework she had finished the night before, and drove across town before starting another demanding day at work. After clocking out, he often stayed for additional hours because overtime meant extra income, and extra income meant another small contribution towards something special. While friends suggested taking a vacation or buying something for himself, Ethan quietly deposited every spare dollar into a travel fund that Lily knew nothing about. He watched airline reward programs, compared ticket prices, and waited patiently for the opportunity that finally appeared nearly a year later. Through careful planning, reward points, and more determination than luck, he managed to book 2 first-class seats for a flight to California, where Lily had always dreamed of seeing the Pacific Ocean with her own eyes. It was not about luxury. It was about giving his daughter proof that beautiful moments could still exist after heartbreak. Lily never asked for expensive things. She found happiness in simple moments that many adults no longer noticed. She collected postcards from places she hoped to visit one day, spent rainy afternoons reading adventure stories borrowed from the local library, and believed every airplane crossing the sky was carrying families toward wonderful memories. When Ethan surprised her with the tickets, just 2 weeks before the trip, she stared at them for several seconds without speaking. Then she wrapped her arms around him so tightly that he thought she might never let go. She asked if they were really going to sit in the front of the airplane where there was more space and bigger windows. Ethan smiled and nodded, pretending it had been an easy decision instead of the result of countless sacrifices. That evening, Lily carefully placed the boarding passes inside one of her favorite books because she said they were too important to leave lying around the house. As the departure date approached, excitement slowly replaced sadness inside their home. Lily counted the days on a small calendar hanging beside the refrigerator, crossing off each square with a bright blue marker before going to bed. Ethan found himself smiling more often than he had in years simply because he enjoyed watching his daughter's happiness grow. For the first time since losing Sarah, the future felt less frightening. He imagined walking along the beach together, taking photographs, eating ice cream by the ocean, and returning home with memories strong enough to carry them through difficult days. He had no way of knowing that another memory would soon overshadow all of those plans. It would become the story people across the country discussed, not because of where they traveled, but because of what happened before the airplane ever left the gate. Meanwhile, another passenger prepared for the same flight from a very different world. Victoria Langford measured success by influence, expensive possessions, and the expectation that every inconvenience could be solved with a phone call. Years of wealth and professional power had convinced her that exceptional treatment was simply part of her daily life. Airline employees recognized her name, hotel managers remembered her preferences, and restaurant reservations often appeared without waiting. She had grown accustomed to hearing people apologize before problems were even confirmed. On this particular morning, a delayed business meeting had already placed her in a frustrated mood, and patience was in short supply. She expected a smooth journey because she believed smooth journeys were something people like her deserved. Neither Ethan nor Victoria knew the other existed when they arrived at the airport. Their paths crossed only because of one seat, one assumption, and one series of decisions that would soon place everyone around them under intense scrutiny. While Ethan focused entirely on making sure Lily enjoyed every moment of their adventure, Victoria was busy making calls, answering emails, and reminding an assistant that changes needed to be made before she landed. They walked through the same terminal without exchanging a glance. Yet fate was quietly guiding them toward a confrontation neither would ever forget. And somewhere among the passengers waiting to board sat another traveler whose identity would remain unnoticed until the exact moment the truth needed a voice. Before the aircraft doors closed, every life connected to this flight was about to change in ways none of them could possibly imagine. The boarding process began with the familiar rhythm of rolling suitcases, quiet conversations, and the soft hum of anticipation that fills an airport gate just before departure. Families gathered their belongings, business travelers checked their phones one last time, and children pressed their faces against the terminal windows, watching baggage crews prepare the aircraft. Ethan Carter held Lily's hand as they waited patiently for the announcement that first-class passengers could begin boarding. Even after seeing the words printed on their boarding passes several times, he still glanced down to make sure they were real. Lily noticed and smiled. She gently nudged his arm and whispered that he looked more nervous than she was. Ethan laughed quietly, admitting she might be right. For months he had imagined this moment, but now that it had finally arrived, he found himself hoping everything would go perfectly. He wanted nothing more than for Lily to remember this trip as the beginning of a happier chapter in their lives. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, she looked up at him with the same bright smile her mother used to wear whenever their family started a new adventure. Ethan took a deep breath and silently thanked Sarah for giving him the strength to keep moving forward, even on the days when it felt impossible. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was calm and welcoming. A flight attendant named Marcus Reed greeted each passenger with a practiced smile that reflected years of experience. Marcus enjoyed his work because every flight brought a different collection of stories, personalities, and destinations. Some passengers were excited, others impatient, and a few simply wanted to be left alone until landing. Ethan greeted Marcus politely, showed his boarding pass without hesitation, and thanked him before guiding Lily towards seat 2A. Marcus glanced at the ticket, nodded with complete confidence, and wished them a pleasant flight. There was no confusion, no hesitation, and certainly no indication that anything was wrong. Lily immediately settled into her spacious seat, running her fingers across the armrest as though she were discovering a hidden treasure. She looked around with wide eyes, amazed by the extra space, the comfortable seating, and the warm welcome from a cabin crew. Ethan helped her fasten her seatbelt before placing their small carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. For the first time in years, he felt as though life was finally rewarding his persistence. While passengers continued boarding, another figure appeared at the entrance to the first-class cabin. Victoria Langford walked confidently down the aisle with the effortless composure of someone accustomed to being recognized wherever she traveled. She wore an elegant designer outfit, carried a luxury handbag that quietly announced her wealth, and barely looked up from the messages appearing on her phone. A younger assistant followed behind, balancing a laptop case and several shopping bags while struggling to match Victoria's pace. Marcus immediately recognized her from previous flights and welcomed her by name. Victoria responded with a brief smile before casually asking whether everything had been prepared as requested. Marcus politely explained that the flight was nearly full, but assured her the crew would do everything possible to make her journey comfortable. Victoria accepted the response with a slight nod, though the expression on her face suggested she expected more than comfort. She expected perfection. As Victoria approached the second row, she suddenly slowed her pace. Her eyes settled on Ethan, who was helping Lily choose a movie from the entertainment screen. She looked from Ethan to the seat number, then back again. For several seconds, she said nothing, almost as if she were waiting for him to realize his mistake and move voluntarily. When that didn't happen, she frowned. Her assistant quietly leaned closer, checking the boarding pass in Victoria's hand before whispering something Ethan could not hear. Victoria's expression hardened. She turned without another word and motioned for Marcus to come closer. Their conversation began quietly enough that nearby passengers paid little attention, but Ethan noticed Marcus' glance toward him more than once. It lasted less than a minute before Marcus excused himself and walked toward Ethan with the same professional smile he had worn earlier, though this time it seemed noticeably more cautious. Marcus apologized for the interruption and politely asked if he could see Ethan's boarding pass once again. Without the slightest concern, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and handed it over. Marcus examined it carefully, comparing the information with the electronic tablet in his hand. Everything appeared to match. Seat 2A, first class. Boarding completed correctly. Marcus thanked Ethan, returned the ticket, and assured him there was no issue before walking back toward Victoria. Ethan assumed the matter had ended there. Unfortunately, it had only begun. Victoria listened as Marcus quietly explained what he had found. Yet instead of accepting the explanation, she shook her head with unmistakable confidence. She pointed directly toward Ethan's seat and calmly insisted that a mistake had been made. Marcus looked uncertain for the first time that morning. He reviewed his tablet again before politely suggesting that the seating records appeared accurate. Victoria's smile disappeared entirely. She informed him that she had flown this route many times and knew exactly where she was supposed to sit. Then she added something that immediately changed Marcus's expression. Whatever she said caused him to glance toward the front galley before excusing himself to find the cabin supervisor. Within moments, Paula Simmons entered the cabin carrying another tablet. She greeted Victoria warmly before listening carefully as the complaint was repeated. Unlike Marcus, Paula's expression remained unreadable. She checked the seating chart herself, then looked toward Ethan. Instead of approaching immediately, she quietly asked Marcus several questions while reviewing the passenger manifest. Ethan watched from his seat without feeling threatened. He had every reason to believe the misunderstanding would be resolved in seconds because he knew his ticket had been purchased legally and confirmed weeks before the flight. Lily, unaware of the growing tension, happily pointed out the clouds forming outside the terminal windows and asked whether they would be flying above them soon. Ethan smiled and told her they would. Even as he answered, he noticed Paula beginning to walk toward them with measured steps that carried far more weight than before. Paula introduced herself politely and requested Ethan's boarding pass one more time. Once again, he handed it over without hesitation. She examined it carefully, compared it against her device, and remained silent longer than Ethan expected. Finally, she looked up and asked a question that caught him completely off guard. She wanted to know exactly how he had obtained the ticket. Ethan blinked in surprise before calmly explaining that he had booked the seats through the airline's rewards program months earlier. Paula nodded slowly, but didn't seem fully convinced. She thanked him for the explanation and stepped away to consult Marcus again. Around them, several nearby passengers had begun paying close attention. Conversations faded. Curious glances spread from one row to another. No one knew precisely what was happening, but everyone sensed that something unusual was unfolding. Ethan still believed the misunderstanding would soon disappear. What he did not realize was that Victoria had already decided she would not accept any outcome that left him sitting beside his daughter. And within the next few minutes, one accusation would transform a routine boarding process into an unforgettable confrontation that would leave the entire cabin in stunned silence. Paula Simmons remained standing in the aisle for several long seconds, her attention fixed on the electronic passenger manifest displayed on her tablet. She compared it with Ethan Carter's boarding pass once again, carefully reviewing every line as if expecting the information to change. It didn't. Seat 2A still belonged to Ethan. The reservation number matched. The payment history confirmed the ticket had been issued weeks earlier through the airline's rewards program. Every piece of information supported the same conclusion. Yet instead of ending the conversation, Paula slowly lowered the tablet and looked toward Victoria Langford, whose expression made it unmistakably clear that she expected a different outcome. The surrounding passengers sensed the tension growing. Those seated nearby quietly stopped their conversations, pretending to read magazines or check their phones while secretly watching every movement. Ethan noticed the uncomfortable silence settling over the cabin and began wondering why a simple seat verification had turned into something much larger. Lily gently tugged at his sleeve and asked whether they would be taking off soon. Ethan smiled reassuringly and told her everything was fine, even though he could no longer ignore the uneasy feeling beginning to settle in his stomach. Victoria finally stepped forward herself. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried the confidence of someone who rarely heard the word no. She explained that she had traveled with the airline for years, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on flights, and had always occupied the same preferred section whenever she booked this route. She insisted there had been a mistake and suggested the reservation system must have assigned her seat to someone else by accident. Several passengers nodded quietly, assuming the airline had simply overbooked the cabin. Others looked toward Ethan, trying to decide whether he appeared to belong in first class. It was an uncomfortable reminder of how quickly people form opinions based on appearance alone. Ethan kept his composure. He simply repeated that he had purchased the tickets legally, checked in online the previous evening, and boarded exactly as instructed. He never raised his voice or accused anyone of dishonesty. He believed the facts would speak for themselves. Unfortunately, facts often take longer to be heard than assumptions. Marcus returned carrying another printed seating chart from the gate desk. Paula studied it carefully before comparing it with her tablet yet again. Every document confirmed the same information. Ethan's reservation was genuine. Victoria's reservation was also genuine, but it listed a different seat only 2 rows behind Ethan. There was no duplicate assignment, no computer error, and no evidence that Ethan had taken anyone else's place. Marcus quietly pointed this out to Paula, expecting the discussion to end. Instead, Victoria immediately rejected the explanation. She insisted she had personally requested an upgrade before arriving at the airport, and claimed someone must have failed to process it correctly. She spoke with such certainty that even members of the crew began questioning whether some last-minute change had been overlooked. Paula hesitated. Rather than explaining the situation immediately, she excused herself to contact the gate staff. That single decision allowed doubt to spread throughout the cabin. Passengers no longer knew whether they were witnessing an airline mistake or something far more serious. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere inside the aircraft changed completely. Boarding had stopped, but the doors remained open. Several passengers glanced repeatedly at their watches, wondering why departure had been delayed. A man across the aisle quietly whispered to his wife that someone was probably sitting in the wrong seat. Another passenger suggested the airline should simply move whoever caused the problem so everyone else could leave on time. Few people understood that Ethan had done absolutely nothing wrong. Lily sensed the growing attention focused on them and leaned closer to her father. She asked in a soft voice whether they had made someone angry. Ethan gently squeezed her hand and assured her they had followed every rule. Even so, he could see uncertainty beginning to replace the excitement that had filled her face only moments earlier. It broke his heart to watch her confidence disappear because of a misunderstanding she could not possibly understand. A few moments later, Paula returned from the front of the aircraft with a noticeably different expression. She informed Ethan that the gate staff had no record of an approved upgrade for Victoria, but she also explained that they wanted to conduct one final verification before departure. Ethan nodded politely and thanked her for checking. He expected that to settle the matter once and for all. Before he could relax, Victoria interrupted. She calmly stated that she would not take her assigned seat because she was convinced the airline had made an unacceptable mistake. She added that she knew several senior executives personally and intended to contact them immediately if the issue was not resolved. Those words visibly changed the mood among the crew. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Paula. Neither wanted to delay the flight further, and neither wanted a complaint from one of the airline's most influential customers. Without realizing it, they allowed the fear of upsetting an important passenger to outweigh the evidence already in front of them. The hesitation did not go unnoticed. Ethan watched as confidence slowly gave way to uncertainty among the crew members who had previously assured him everything was correct. Instead of defending the verified seating records, they began discussing possible alternatives that would avoid confrontation. One suggestion was to move Ethan and Lily to another part of the aircraft temporarily while the situation was reviewed after takeoff. Ethan listened carefully before calmly asking a simple question. If his tickets had already been confirmed as valid, why should his daughter lose the seats he had spent months earning? His voice never rose above a respectful tone, but the question echoed through the unusually quiet cabin. No one answered immediately because everyone knew he had a point. Even several nearby passengers nodded in agreement. Victoria, however, remained completely unmoved. She folded her arms and stared confidently toward the front of the aircraft, convinced the decision would ultimately favor her. Just as Paula appeared ready to make a final decision, a new announcement came through her headset. Someone from the gate had requested additional time before closing the aircraft door. She quietly acknowledged the message and then looked directly at Ethan with an expression that mixed sympathy and uncertainty. She explained that, until the matter was fully resolved, he and Lily would need to remain seated while the airline completed one final review. Ethan thanked her and agreed without argument, believing patience would soon bring the truth to light. Across the aisle, several passengers resumed whispering among themselves. Phones were discreetly raised beneath newspapers and handbags as people began recording what they believed might become an unusual travel story. None of them realized that the most important moment of the day had not happened yet. Within the next few minutes, one unexpected passenger would quietly stand up, and everything the crew believed about Ethan Carter would begin to unravel in front of the entire cabin. The silence that settled over the first-class cabin felt heavier than anything Ethan Carter had experienced in years. Every passing second seemed to stretch longer than the last as passengers waited for someone, anyone, to make a final decision. Flight attendants moved carefully through the aisle, speaking in hushed voices while trying to avoid drawing even more attention to the growing dispute. Yet that had become impossible. Nearly everyone in the cabin was now watching. Some openly stared, while others pretended to scroll through their phones, even as their cameras quietly recorded the unfolding scene. Ethan noticed the lenses pointed in his direction, but chose to ignore them. His attention remained fixed on Lily, whose excitement had been replaced by quiet uncertainty. She looked out the window, then back at her father, searching his face for reassurance. Ethan smiled, although it required every ounce of strength he had. He refused to let his daughter see how deeply the situation was affecting him. For Ethan, this was no longer about a first-class seat. It was about dignity. Throughout his life, he had learned that losing his temper almost never solved anything. As a young man, he had watched arguments destroy friendships, careers, and families. After Sarah's passing, he promised himself that Lily would grow up seeing patience instead of anger, respect instead of bitterness. That promise guided every decision he made. Even now, while strangers quietly judged him and whispered among themselves, he remained calm. He believed the truth did not become stronger simply because it was spoken louder. Unfortunately, calmness can sometimes be mistaken for weakness. Victoria Langford interpreted Ethan's quiet confidence as surrender. She assumed he understood he was about to lose. The slight smile that returned to her face suggested she believed the outcome was already decided. Paula Simmons stepped into the aisle once again, accompanied by Marcus Reed. Their expressions revealed the pressure they were feeling. The flight was now delayed, passengers were growing impatient, and messages from the gate continued arriving through their headsets. Paula cleared her throat before speaking in a measured tone. She explained that the airline wanted to avoid further delays and asked whether Ethan would be willing to relocate temporarily while customer service completed its review after landing. The request was polite, but its meaning was unmistakable. Ethan looked down at Lily before lifting his eyes toward Paula. He asked another simple question. If every record showed that the seats belonged to him, why was he the only passenger being asked to move? Once again, no immediate answer came. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Paula looked toward Victoria, then back at Ethan. The silence itself became an answer that many passengers found difficult to ignore. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman quietly spoke to the man seated beside her. She had watched the entire exchange from the moment boarding began. Unlike others, she had paid close attention to every document the crew examined and every explanation they offered. She leaned forward just enough for Paula to hear her, and politely remarked that the father had shown his boarding pass several times without a single discrepancy being found. A few nearby passengers nodded in agreement. Another gentleman added that moving Ethan simply because someone wealthier demanded it did not seem fair. The comments were respectful, but they changed the atmosphere inside the cabin. For the first time, the discussion was no longer limited to the crew and the two passengers involved. Other travelers had begun questioning the decision as well. Victoria noticed the shift immediately. Her expression tightened as she realized public opinion was no longer entirely on her side. Determined to regain control of the situation, Victoria reached into her handbag, removed her phone, and confidently announced that she intended to contact someone at the airline's corporate headquarters. She mentioned the names of senior executives with the ease of someone accustomed to personal access. Marcus exchanged another uneasy glance with Paula. They both understood that complaints from influential customers often resulted in lengthy investigations, difficult meetings, and sometimes disciplinary action. The possibility of becoming the subject of such a complaint weighed heavily on them. Wanting to protect the airline's reputation and their own careers, they began considering solutions that focused more on ending the confrontation quickly than on following the evidence already before them. It was an understandable human reaction, but it was also the exact mistake that would soon place their own jobs in jeopardy. Just as Paula appeared ready to speak again, a calm voice interrupted from several rows behind the dispute. The voice was neither loud nor demanding, yet carried enough confidence that everyone nearby turned to look. A tall gentleman slowly stood from his seat, straightened his jacket, and stepped into the aisle with remarkable composure. He had remained silent throughout the entire confrontation, observing every detail without drawing attention to himself. Few passengers had noticed him before that moment, and none of the crew recognized him immediately. His name was Noah Bennett. He offered a polite smile before asking whether he could ask a single question. Paula nodded cautiously. Noah looked around the cabin before speaking with the calm certainty of someone who had spent years making difficult decisions. He asked why a passenger whose boarding documents had been verified multiple times was still being treated as though he had done something wrong. No one answered immediately. Noah continued, explaining that he had watched every interaction from the beginning of boarding and had yet to see a single piece of evidence suggesting Ethan Carter had violated any airline policy. He spoke without raising his voice or accusing anyone of bad intentions. Instead, he simply listed the facts exactly as they had occurred. Marcus checked the boarding pass. Paula checked the manifest. The gate confirmed the reservation. Every official record supported Ethan. So why, Noah asked, was the conversation still continuing? His question echoed through the cabin with surprising force because everyone listening already knew the answer, even if no one wanted to say it aloud. Victoria immediately turned toward Noah, clearly irritated that another passenger had become involved. She politely suggested that the matter did not concern him. Noah smiled respectfully before replying that whenever fairness is questioned in a public place, it concerns everyone who witnesses it. The simplicity of his response left the cabin completely silent. Ethan looked at the stranger with quiet gratitude, but said nothing. He had no idea who Noah Bennett was or why he had chosen to intervene. What Ethan did not know was that Noah possessed experience unlike anyone else on board. Years earlier, he had served as one of the airline industry's most respected operations executives before retiring from corporate leadership. He understood airline procedures inside and out, and within moments he would notice a critical mistake that everyone else had overlooked. Before another 5 minutes passed, the captain himself would leave the cockpit, and the direction of the entire story would change forever. For several seconds after Noah Bennett finished speaking, no one in the cabin uttered a single word. Even the ordinary sounds of boarding seemed to disappear beneath the weight of the moment. Marcus Reed looked toward Paula Simmons, hoping she would respond first, but she remained frozen, replaying the events of the past several minutes in her mind. Everything Noah had said was true. Ethan Carter had presented a valid boarding pass. The passenger manifest matched his ticket. The gate agents had confirmed the reservation. Yet somehow the focus had shifted from verifying the facts to satisfying the loudest complaint. Paula suddenly realized that every decision made after Victoria Langford objected had been driven by pressure instead of procedure. It was a realization that arrived too late to prevent what happened next. Noah took one slow step forward before politely introducing himself. His name alone meant nothing to most passengers, but Marcus's expression changed the instant he heard it. Years earlier, while completing advanced customer service training, Marcus had studied several operational case reviews written by Noah during his time as one of the airline industry's most respected executives. Although Noah had retired long ago, his reputation remained well known among senior airline managers. Marcus quickly composed himself and greeted him respectfully, asking whether he had previously worked in aviation. Noah smiled modestly and admitted that he had spent more than 3 decades overseeing airline operations, customer service standards, and safety investigations. He explained that retirement had allowed him to travel quietly without expecting special treatment, which was exactly why he rarely mentioned his background. Today, however, remaining silent would have meant allowing an obvious injustice to continue. Without criticizing anyone personally, Noah calmly asked Paula to review one additional detail. He requested the electronic log showing exactly when each passenger's seat assignment had last been modified. Paula hesitated briefly before accessing the record through her tablet. The information appeared almost instantly. Ethan Carter's reservation had remained unchanged for more than 6 weeks. Victoria Langford's reservation also appeared exactly as the printed manifest indicated. There was no approved upgrade, no reassignment, No system error. Then Noah pointed toward a small notation displayed near Victoria's booking history. It showed that a request for an upgrade had indeed been submitted shortly before boarding, but the request had never been approved because every first-class seat was already occupied. The request remained pending when Victoria entered the aircraft. She had mistaken her request for a confirmation. The misunderstanding itself was understandable. Everything that followed was not. Paula stared at the screen in disbelief. The answer had been there all along, hidden within information no one thought to examine closely because everyone assumed the complaint itself was credible. Marcus slowly lowered his head as the full weight of the mistake settled over him. Neither he nor Paula had intentionally treated Ethan unfairly, but both recognized that they had allowed assumptions to influence their judgment. Instead of relying completely on verified records, they had become distracted by Victoria's confidence, influence, and repeated references to senior executives. Around the cabin, passengers exchanged knowing glances. Several quietly nodded as the truth became impossible to ignore. Victoria herself appeared momentarily stunned before insisting there had to be another explanation. She argued that someone at the airline had verbally assured her an upgrade would be available. Noah listened respectfully before reminding everyone that verbal expectations never override documented reservations. Airline procedures existed precisely to prevent misunderstandings from becoming public confrontations. At that exact moment, the cockpit door opened. Captain Daniel Brooks stepped into the first-class cabin after receiving word that boarding had been delayed far longer than expected. Years of command experience had taught him never to rely solely on second-hand summaries whenever an unusual situation affected passenger safety or operational decisions. He greeted the passengers politely before asking Paula for a concise explanation. She handed him the tablet without attempting to defend her earlier actions. Captain Brooks reviewed the seating records, the gate confirmation, and the timestamp Noah had identified. His expression remained calm, but those who knew him understood he was becoming increasingly concerned. He asked only one question. Had Ethan Carter violated any airline policy at any point during boarding? Marcus quietly answered that he had not. The captain nodded once, closed the tablet, and looked directly toward Ethan. Walking down the aisle, Captain Brooks stopped beside seat 2A and extended his hand. Ethan stood respectfully and shook it, unsure what was about to happen. The captain apologized in front of every passenger for the unnecessary embarrassment Ethan and Lily had experienced. He explained that the airline's records clearly confirmed Ethan's rightful reservation and acknowledged that the crew should never have continued questioning a passenger once the documentation had already been verified. Lily looked up at her father, noticing the relief that slowly returned to his face. Around them, several passengers began applauding quietly. Others who had spent the last several minutes recording the incident continued filming, but now the story unfolding before their cameras had changed completely. It was no longer about a father accused of occupying the wrong seat. It had become a lesson about fairness, accountability, and the danger of making decisions based on status instead of evidence. Victoria remained standing beside the aisle, visibly shaken by the sudden turn of events. For the first time since boarding began, she seemed unsure of what to say. She attempted to explain that she had genuinely believed the seat belonged to her and had never intended for the situation to escalate so dramatically. Captain Brooks acknowledged that misunderstandings happen, but he also explained that every passenger deserves to be treated with equal fairness regardless of wealth, profession, or travel history. He reminded the entire cabin that airline procedures exist to protect every customer equally. Then, after thanking Noah Bennett for bringing the overlooked booking record to everyone's attention, he requested a private conversation with Paula and Marcus near the front galley. As they walked away together, neither crew member realized that the discussion about to take place would determine far more than the outcome of a delayed flight. By the time the aircraft finally departed, a formal report would already be on its way to airline headquarters, and before the day was over, decisions would be made that would permanently change several careers. The cabin slowly settled into an uneasy silence as Captain Daniel Brooks disappeared into the front galley with Paula Simmons and Marcus Reed. Although the immediate disagreement had finally been resolved, everyone on board understood that the story was far from over. The aircraft remained parked at the gate while the captain contacted airline operations to report exactly what had taken place before departure. Company policy required a detailed account whenever a passenger complaint resulted in a significant delay, especially when questions of customer treatment and procedural compliance were involved. Captain Brooks believed that honesty was the only acceptable response. He refused to minimize the incident or shift responsibility away from the crew. Instead, he described every event exactly as it had happened, from Victoria Langford's initial complaint to Noah Bennett's intervention and the discovery that Ethan Carter's reservation had been correct from the very beginning. The report took several minutes to complete, but every word would later become an important part of the airline's internal investigation. While the captain remained occupied, Marcus stood quietly near the entrance to the first-class cabin, reflecting on the choices he had made. He remembered the moment Ethan first presented his boarding pass. There had been no confusion then, no discrepancy, and no reason to question the reservation. Yet the instant Victoria mentioned her influence within the airline, uncertainty replaced confidence. Marcus realized he had unconsciously given greater weight to her status than to the evidence in front of him. It was a painful lesson because he had entered the profession believing every passenger deserved equal respect. Paula experienced the same realization. She understood that although she had intended to avoid conflict and keep the flight on schedule, she had instead allowed pressure to influence decisions that should have been based entirely on policy. Neither crew member considered themselves unfair people, yet both recognized that fairness requires more than good intentions. It requires the courage to stand by the facts, even when doing so may upset someone powerful. Several rows behind Ethan, Noah Bennett quietly returned to his seat, hoping the attention would shift away from him. Ethan, however, stood up and walked over before the aircraft doors closed. Extending his hand, he thanked Noah for speaking when almost everyone else had remained silent. Noah smiled warmly and admitted that he had not acted because of his former career or experience. He acted because he had once been a young father himself. Years earlier, he had learned that children often remember not only the difficult moments they experience, but also how the adults around them respond. Noah told Ethan that Lily would never forget watching her father remain calm, respectful, and truthful under extraordinary pressure. That lesson, he explained, would stay with her far longer than any luxury seat or expensive vacation ever could. Ethan looked toward his daughter, who smiled proudly from across the aisle, and realized Noah was absolutely right. A short time later, Captain Brooks returned to the cabin with an announcement that immediately captured everyone's attention. Speaking over the aircraft's public address system, he apologized once again to Ethan and Lily on behalf of the airline. He acknowledged that every customer deserves to be treated with dignity and explained that the company would be conducting a formal review of the incident immediately after landing. He also thanked the passengers for their patience and recognized Noah Bennett for respectfully helping the crew identify an overlooked detail without creating additional conflict. The announcement was met with warm applause that spread throughout the aircraft. Ethan felt embarrassed by the attention, but grateful that the truth had finally been recognized. Lily squeezed his hand and whispered that her mother would have been proud of him. Those simple words meant more to Ethan than any compensation the airline could ever offer. News of the incident traveled remarkably quickly after the flight landed. Several passengers uploaded videos they had recorded during the confrontation, and within hours the story began appearing across social media platforms. Unlike the short clips that initially suggested a passenger had refused to leave a first-class seat, the complete recordings told a very different story. Viewers watched Ethan remain calm while repeatedly presenting proof of his reservation. They saw Noah Bennett calmly explain why documented evidence should outweigh assumptions, and they listened as Captain Brooks publicly apologized for the crew's handling of the situation. Public reaction was immediate. Thousands of comments praised Ethan for his patience and criticized the tendency to judge people based on appearance rather than facts. Many viewers admitted they might have reached the wrong conclusion if they had only seen the first few seconds of the confrontation. The full story became a powerful reminder that first impressions are often incomplete. Within days, the airline completed its internal investigation. The review concluded that although Victoria Langford had misunderstood the status of her upgrade request, the greater failure involved the crew's response after Ethan's reservation had already been verified. Company policy clearly required employees to rely on documented records instead of assumptions or customer influence. Because those procedures had not been followed, Paula Simmons was dismissed from her supervisory position, while Marcus Reed received a lengthy suspension and chose to resign shortly afterward rather than continue under disciplinary review. Captain Daniel Brooks, however, was formally commended for correcting the situation before departure and for ensuring that the final report accurately reflected every detail. Ethan and Lily received a personal apology from senior airline executives, a full refund for their trip, and complimentary travel vouchers for future vacations. Ethan accepted the apology graciously, explaining that what mattered most was not the compensation, but the hope that another family would never experience the same treatment. Months later, Ethan and Lily finally stood together on the California shoreline they had dreamed about for so long. As waves rolled gently across the sand, Lily looked toward the horizon before asking her father whether he regretted staying in his seat that day. Ethan smiled thoughtfully before shaking his head. He explained that there are moments in life when walking away may seem easier, but standing quietly for the truth can sometimes teach a lesson that reaches far beyond the people involved. Lily slipped her hand into his and said she hoped she would always remember that. Ethan believed she would. Looking back, he realized the journey had never truly been about flying first class. It had been about showing his daughter that character is revealed not when life is easy, but when it becomes unexpectedly difficult. Long after the headlines faded and the videos stopped circulating, that lesson remained the most valuable thing either of them brought home. As this remarkable story reminds us, respect should never depend on wealth, appearance, or influence. Every person deserves to be treated fairly. Every claim deserves to be examined carefully, and every decision should be guided by evidence rather than assumptions. What do you think? Did the airline make the right decision after completing its investigation? Should Marcus have been given a second chance? Or was the company's response justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below because we genuinely love to hear your perspective. And if this story reminded you that integrity still matters, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another unforgettable story. Until next time, remember that the quietest person in a room may be carrying the strongest truth of all.